Basically, if you believe that money is power and people own the money, then the people have the power.
As a responsible person with growing concerns for your privacy and personal liberty, you want to know where we're headed and what you can do about it. We ask the experts what you need to do to take prudent and responsible action to safeguard your family's wealth and well-being, and what basic first steps will help you to be aware and prepared. ReluctantPreppers.com.
Welcome back, Reluctant Preppers. We have a returning distinguished guest tonight. David Morgan, founder of themorganreport.com and a well-known guru on silver and gold markets, is here with us again here on Reluctant Preppers. David, thank you for joining us once again.
Yeah, it's my pleasure to be back. Thank you.
We wanted to make sure we connected with you on a couple of things at this time. One is we've just had announcements of major news stories coming out of some western states in the U.S. last week. Both Utah and Arizona declared no state capital gains tax on silver and gold, capital gains from increases in value of those holdings because, and that's maybe the most important thing, is because they say that they are money and you shouldn't have to pay capital gains tax if one form of money has measured in another currency has gained or lost. That's not a real gain. And especially it was mentioned that the Federal Reserve's policy of driving down, inflationary policy drives down the value of the U.S. dollar, so it causes apparent gains in people's who've been, holders of bullion. We thought we'd weigh in with you, see if you could weigh in on what your take is on this, and do you see that as the starting of a trend that will sweep across? If so, how far, and where else will it lead us? And just help us understand, kind of unpack this for us, and tell us about the significance of these advances in law changes out west.
Well, certainly, Duncan, and thanks for the question. I'm going to back up a little bit because it's my understanding that these have passed like in the House, but at the state governmental level, it's similar to the federal government, which means you've got to have the congressional side and the Senate side. The state senators approve it and then sign it into law by the governor. So to my best understanding, they've passed the first phase, but they're not signed into law yet. However, we back up further. It a bill not about the tax implications of gold and silver, but the ability to use gold and silver in any transaction, commercial or private, is legal in the state of Utah. And of course, I made a bit of a deal about that when it took place. I was actually there when the governor of Utah signed it into law, which was quite some time ago. So obviously I am, in favor of this. I'm also in favor of the fact that, gold and silver are money and have been for thousands of years. And there's no fiat currency that's gone much beyond a couple hundred years. So that is something I'm very favorable to. And what is the impact? Will it spread? I think yes. I think the more that the economic system and the monetary system deteriorate, the more people that wake up, the more there is a move into something that they can trust, and something that's been trusted for eons, obviously, are the precious metals. So that trend is big and getting bigger. And what will happen at the state level, I think more and more states will adopt something similar to what you outlined about Arizona and Idaho. And to go even further, I did an interview, in fact, many thought it was one of my best interviews ever, not an interview with me. My interview of Dr. Edwin Vieira, probably, in my opinion, absolutely the best constitutional attorney out there. And he has written a document about using gold and silver in any transactions. And basically, under the federal government law right now, you're still allowed to do that. However, this document that he wrote is about 78 pages. It's available on the website portal for the members. And this is something that you would have the ability to do regardless of what the state level does. But again, coming back full circle, I really think this is something that will have a profound influence over time.
In that, if we could look at those separate steps in that progression, because you're right, it was already from previous years the declaration of gold and silver as legal tender. And what is the implication of that? First, this acknowledgement of them as money. I mean, that's ironically, if you look at bullion coins that are produced by the U.S. Mint, they say right on them, $1 US or $5 US or whatever, depending on the denomination and the metal that they're made out of. What is the intrinsic and political and economic significance of a nation basically admitting, even though the whole world has gone to fiat currencies, that precious metals are money? Can you first help us understand why that is a crucial step?
Absolutely. Well, the first thing is politically. I mean, this is a political situation that basically no government wants to answer, because every government on the planet is beholden to some type of banking system. And the banking system is really well above governments. I'm going to digress a bit, but I just came back from an Anarchapulco conference in Acapulco a few weeks back. And Foster Gamble, who did the Thrive movie with his wife, and of course there were many people that participated in that movie. And if I recall correctly, it took him about 5 years to make that movie. And in the movie, he goes through a lot of things. But one of the things that is in the movie is the hierarchy of basically the financial system. And what's interesting in his pyramid is where the government level is on the pyramid, and it's about halfway up. So there's a lot of banking entities above government. And this is something I've strived to, make very, very clear in my work, especially in the public domain. It's in the private domain as well, but most people that are members understand that. But many people think that, the president has all this power and governments have all the power. Well, actually, the way that the Thrive movie shows it is the governments are basically underneath the corporate interest. And you can argue, Jim Rickards has gone on in his latest book about, fascism and the absolute best definition of it. I'm not going to go into that right here. What I am going to say is that corporatism is often known as fascism, which means that the government and the largest corporations bind together to make the laws. In other words, the corporations basically dictate to government how they are going to be treated and what the rules are going to be. So that, I believe, is a fact in most cases on the large, greater picture of things. I'm not talking about, mom and pop type of shops. I'm talking about the huge corporate interests that we're all aware of. For example, the few that run the whole TV system, the whole mainstream media system. So moving up from there, coming in a full circle back, politics hate honest money. They hate free transaction. They hate situations where people can transact face-to-face, property to property, and there's no record of it, where that, so much silver or gold is available to purchase land, purchase a house, purchase a car, purchase bread, make a meal. I mean, anything that you really want to think about that can be transacted for money can be transacted for real money. The other part is where government's role is in the hierarchy of precious metals. And as you indicated earlier, what we see is the government mints produce real money. I mean, the U.S. Mint is the only thing that produces a profit, to my knowledge. And what do? They mint silver and gold. And what's on those coins? Well, $1 is on the silver coin, and $50 is on the gold coin. And you know what? They're legal tender. I mean, you could go into any store in the United States, throw a 1 ounce gold eagle on the counter and use it as $50, and no one would be able to refuse it. Now, not that people would take it. I mean, if you did that at Walmart, McDonald's or somewhere, I mean, these people would probably just go nuts, because none of them, very few, have seen any gold, let alone a $50 coin, and they would wonder if it was even legal or not. It is, and no one in our camp is going to be foolish enough to do that. I mean, the only one I could think of that might do it would be, Mark Dice might make a video about it and see, how the little, 17-year-old at McDonald's reacts and gets her manager over there. And, anyway, I'm way down the rabbit hole. I don't mean to be. The point I'm making is simple. Most people don't understand honest money whatsoever. And yet the whole system at one time was founded on honest money, because there was such a problem in the foundational aspect of the United States of America, having gone through the continental process, where they understood to the their depths of their being that having fiat money led to ruin. And having that experience, it was written into the foundational agreement called the Constitution, which was your God-given rights that they were secured by government. I mean, that was their function. The government's function was to secure your God-given or natural rights. If you prefer the word natural, go ahead. And that part of that whole thing was honest money because of the experience with the Continental. So now we've gone, and this cycles all the time. I mean, all the time, meaning from a long-term perspective of history, you see, honest money, sound finance, and there's, arguments against the gold-only argument. I'm not a gold-only bugger. I think you should have competing currencies. I think you should have gold and silver trading at a ratio that's not set, that the market determines. There's a lot, I think, that could be enhanced in our modern times versus what has taken place in the old quote-unquote gold-only standard. But nonetheless, a move toward honesty is a move that we need to make.
Question for you on the fiat currency replacing gold. In that historical cycle that you talk about, you start out with sound money and honest, sound finances and honest money, and then the central banks come in and want to be able to create fiat money and loan it into existence at interest. Is it as bad as it's explained by Mike Maloney on several occasions that this is absolutely a scheme that is basically indebting you and the populace, the citizens, in such a way that they can never be free of. They can never get out of that debt that's created by the central banks when they create the fiat currency, which is payable back with plus interest, which doesn't exist unless they further create that, unless the central bank further creates that. Is the way you have researched that and analyzed that, is that a correct way of understanding that system, and is that partly why, if it is that why the Constitution, fought so hard to prevent that?
No, absolutely. You answer your own question. I mean, because the amount of currency, or M1, that exists cannot be paid off with interest, you can never make it happen. So in other words, the indebtedness of the individual, of the country, whoever's in debt, be it private or public debt, the monetary existence in any point in time is not 100% complete, which means that in order for that party that is owed the money, more has to be created. So it never catches up. And I think you did a better job of saying it than me, but the interest doesn't exist. So you continually have this Ponzi scheme. That's the definition of a Ponzi scheme. In other words, the first people that are invested in the scheme get paid back by new investors. That's how the Social Security system is set up now. I mean, the whole system is based on something that doesn't exist, which means the interest to pay off the people that have made the loan. And of course, the bankers are well aware of this fact. But since they created the money to begin with, what have they done? Well, they own basically all the real wealth. Well, what's real wealth? Well, we know gold and silver are real wealth, but what about all the land? What about all the real estate? What about all the corporations? I mean, just think if you owned 50% of General Electric, what would that mean? Well, that would mean you own a heck of a lot of land, a heck of a lot of buildings, a heck of a lot of machines, a heck of a lot of intellectual capacity. In other words, all the patents that they have, all the machine tools they have, all the workers. Do they own them? In a way, yes. In a way, they actually do. So this is the situation at hand. So let's say the system collapses and the bank is owed by these corporations. Well, guess who gets to keep the assets or the collateral that was used to start the loan? Well, the banks. So the idea that the banks lose in an all-out, financial crisis is very unlikely. Can you rule it out entirely? No, you cannot. I mean, if you go back into history, you can see where, people took to the streets and, things got so unbelievably difficult that the ownership changed at the point of a gun, more or less. And I'm not forecasting that. All I'm doing is reaching back into history and moving it forward and saying, what the outcome would be like, no one knows, but we know it'll be very difficult. So, and it's something I think I need to pause, take a deep breath, and remind myself that, first of all, humanity's gone through this time and time again. It just happens to be our turn. It'll probably be bigger than any time ever in recorded history. But people are able to do it. In other words, even in the worst of the Weimar Republic, it was certainly hard, and the worst of the Great Depression, which is a debt liquidating depression, because we were on a gold standard. But regardless of it being a hyperinflationary depression or a debt liquidating depression, it's still a depression, which means the mood of the people overall is low and that things are hard, but it doesn't mean that life stops. And what it means is a huge rearrangement and readjustment. And many people are used to using the word reset, which I'm not against. I think there will be some type of reset. The biggest situation is, are the bankers going to be ahead of it or behind it? And that's something that even they, as arrogant as they are, may lose control of. And if that's the case, then what we're going to see is a lot of SOCs, self-organizing communities that will come together, like what happened in the movie The Empty ATM, that I featured on our website, richesandresources.com. And if you go to that website, richesandresources.com, and get our free weekly e-letter, you'll also be able to download the Riches and Resources Report. And I give you that movie for free and access to another movie that talks about the decline of the age of empire. So those are two really key movies that are pretty enjoyable to watch that explain it in great detail. One is what happens as the financial system unwinds and everything that it goes along with that. And the other movie is a real life example from the year 2000 of what the banking system looks like when they have reset.
In the face of that reality of the debt that the ordinary citizens can never pay off, and the risk that by being beholden to that, we're liable for the potential loss of all of our assets, can you now bring it back home and talk to us about the real life implications, why it's so significant about these legal tender laws that are being passed about gold and silver? How does that fly in the? Is this actually a case where the ordinary person wins? I
think so. It could be. It doesn't necessarily mean it would be. I mean, I'll try to keep it simple. Basically, if you believe that money is power and people own the money, then the people have the power. It's really that simple. So let's just take that one step further and say, well, what if only gold and silver were allowed as money? Now, I'm not saying that's the case by a long shot, but let's just do the thought experiment. If only gold and silver were money, and now, for the first time that we know of, more gold is owned privately than is owned institutionally. It's about 50-50. But still, that's a large amount of gold in private hands. So again, if the people have the power, which equates to money or real money in my view, from a long-term perspective of monetary history, then they have the power. And that's what you want. I mean, if you want self-governance, and then you want to have the power to the people, and of course, this is really interesting for me. I laugh because, part of it sounds almost communistic when you say, communism, power to the people, and in a way, in a true constitutional republic, it is power to the people. And of course, there's a lot of differences between those two. I don't want to go into it. I think most people on your channel understand the difference, but nonetheless, do the people control their own destiny in either one of those systems in reality? And of course, in a way, no. I mean, in the early foundational part of the United States of America, under the intent of the founding fathers, where the states people had all the rights. They gave up a little bit of those rights to the states and just a bit more to the District of Columbia. It's not even a state. It's under a state. It's below a state. It doesn't have the power of the state. Of course, all that's changed over the years, and that's a huge study that I've taken massive amount of time looking at. And sorry, I digress. But coming back, power to the people means money in their pockets that everyone understands that's not at the edict of government. It's people themselves. And you see this when societies break down. I mean, go to Zimbabwe. What were people doing? They were panning for gold. Look at Argentina. What they do? Panning for gold or trading jewelry or whatever. So it seems to always go back to the most basic form of money, which, it could be seashells or salt. I get that. But the true reality is it's gold and silver. And
then taking it one step further, that's where you mentioned, you kind of laughed when you said power to the people, but there's a lot of, another thing that's ironic about that is that sounds almost like a countercultural thing to say in a country where we're supposed to be a free country and that sort of thing. I mean, I remember as a kid we would say that to our friends if they were standing on the sidewalk and we wanted to get off and they go, "That's a free country, I can be here if I want to," is that we have this idea that part of our birthright as Americans is that we should be free people. And yet nowadays people have experienced so much of that diminished autonomy and diminished liberty and diminished freedom by the encroachment and usurpation of our natural rights by ever expanding government and corporate interests, that now to say something like power to people almost sounds like, well, can we actually get away with that? No, we couldn't possibly get away with that, because in the real world, the good guy always finishes last, and it's the ones that hold the elite, pull the strings behind the curtain, that are actually able to make things happen. So, what kind of resistance are these efforts to restore the intrinsic and natural rights of free people in the form of, for example, gold and silver as a legal tender and no capital gains, that sort of thing? What kind of resistance is this likely to run up against? Just back to the idea of you start draining the swamp and the swamp starts fighting back. What do you see as realistic countermeasures that are likely to crop up to thwart this?
Well, that's an open question, an open season, and that's a great question. You could envision that there'd be higher capital gains taxes, or states would add on some kind of an excise tax. I mean, they might let it trade for without any state tax on it, but then there might be a federal tax. They might let it go at the state level, but then anyone that does more than 10,000 in gold and or silver on an annual basis has an excise tax of 0.5% due to the state. Who knows what to come up with? I mean, these legislators and lawyers sit there all day long and dream up stuff like that. So, it's open season. I mean, and the other part would be it's not worth it. I mean, there's only, less than 1% of the population even deals with gold. Less than that by far is going to actually do transactions in gold. It's not worth our time and effort to even worry about it. And things just go through as proposed in, Idaho and Arizona.
So I guess if you could zoom in a little bit, though, on that idea of transacting in precious metals, what would that make it completely, untraceable, free you from having to deal with a lot of encroachments on your freedom? What does that look like? What would a life look like where you're transacting primarily in precious metals?
Well, I think it'd be a lot more private, obviously. I mean, if you bought, whatever you bought, if you bought it for physical metal, it'd be pretty hard to determine, what the transaction was. If you look at, going back a notch in the precious metals debit cards that exist. I mean, my friend Dale Olmsted has one here in Spokane. I actually have one. Then you have Gold Money that has a debit card. You have Euro Pacific from Peter Schiff. They have one. And there are others. So that is a reportable transaction because it's all done through the existing banking system. In the case that I'm the most familiar with, basically you get a printout of what the market value of the silver or gold or either one that you used for the transaction and what the purchase price was. So you either have a gain or a loss, and that's accumulated for you. It's done automatically by the computer. You get a printout every month like you would in a normal debit card or credit card statement, and then at the end of the year, you've got your tally. So that's one way. But on, coming back, what you really asked me is if you did it, physically with just coins, then, none of that exists.
Any other related insights from your research and the discussions that you've had at the Anarchapulco or other conferences recently that can really help people understand what stakes they're up against in this battle for their maintaining their freedom in the face of the fiat banking system and what steps they should consider taking?
Well, I think if everyone really is objective and tells the truth and gets to a place where they can think objectively, I think the first thing is not to be a socialist. If you look at the reality of the situation and you look at the U.S. corporate state, I say that in the definition of the word state, what everyone has to be is a card-carrying socialist. That's what the Social Security system is all about. You are registered as a socialist. And once you're registered as a socialist to the corporate U.S., then they dictate to you what your privileges are. That's why many people, when they take the stand, say they're going to exercise their Fifth Amendment privilege. Why don't they say they are executing their right as a God-given free man under the Fifth Amendment? Well, because they don't have that status. They are a Socialist Party A, which is the Democrats, or Socialist Party B, which is the Republicans, or Socialist Party B, which is the Republicans, Socialist Party A, which is the Democrats. I don't care which one you are. You are a registered socialist. So if you really want freedom, you've got to go back to a system where you are free. But the system has been usurped over time, all legally, by the way, that takes the average person at a legal definition, which means that you are, for all practical purposes, owned by the state. I mean, I made that very clear in the video Escape the Matrix. I mean, if you're interested in, a 3-minute video that's kind of like a thought provoker, or at least I think it is, you can make your own comments on it. But I did one called Escape the Matrix. Go to Google and just type David Morgan Escape the Matrix, and I'll pop the video up. But in that video, I make it very clear, which is a takeoff on the Matrix, of what the reality is for everybody that's in a corporate personship, which isn't just the United States. I mean, the same type of legal system exists in Canada, all Western states, and most of the rest of the world for all practical purposes. So basically, the state looks at you as a resource. You are a human resource. I mean, if you work for a large corporation, they have a HR department, human resources. So you're treated as a number because you are a number. And if you think you have political clout because you are a member of a certain party, you have to remember, as I said earlier about the Thrive movie, where are you on the hierarchy and who owns you?
If we could change gears and take us to your quick overview of the current direction you see in the gold and silver and markets, and also if you could touch on some base metals. Most notably, we had a discussion recently on our channel about zinc and saw 5 years of just straight down dropping of zinc reserves at the London Metals Exchange in the face of 1 year of steadily increasing prices. So could you talk to us briefly about gold and silver and zinc and what you see going on in the broader markets right now?
Sure. Gold and silver I see sideways to down, and I got more specific for my website members. So I'll say that. As far as the overall market, I was looking for a decline in the overall stock market. I'm not good at timing that, but I don't let that persuade me one way or the other, because I let the market tell me. It looks as if we've certainly started to sell off in the overall equity market basis, the DJI or the S&P 500. We were in a distribution pattern, meaning the strong hands were giving it to the weak hands. Then they mark it up to make everybody feel good, and then they take it down. They take it up so they actually get a little bit of an advantage to short the market. So that looks like that's taking place. The bond market really bases the 10-year note, which is the most important, really has gone nowhere if you look at it objectively from a long-term point of view. Yes, it's gone up and down, it squiggles around, but my point being it's within a channel formation. So from a channel formation aspect, which is a good way to look at it, if you look at it and squint your eyes, you see a straight line, more or less, wiggly straight line. So a lot happening. On the zinc side, we were the first, as far as I know, to say that zinc was going to be in short supply. And we put out a zinc recommendation that has very good silver credits. In fact, if silver banged up to, $40 an ounce, I'm just making up the number to give the correct idea, it would be actually a silver company, not a zinc company. But this company's done very well. It's buy and hold, and pretty happy with the results. So zinc, I'm not a big base metal guy, but we look at all the resources. I mean, I want to make that very, very clear that although silver is my favorite metal and I spend most of my time in the precious metals arena, that the Morgan Report looks at all resources. I mean, we were actually the first on the REE story, the rare earth element story. We were there before the original rare earth element guy, Jim Dines. I mean, Dines wrote about it probably a year after we started. So, we look at all the resources, we look for value, and we do speculate, but that's not our prime function. We try to make everybody happy, which is impossible. But people that follow our work at the membership level are serious. These are people that really want to invest, and they want to do it, in a very in a manner in which they reduce their risk, they answer reward, and they're not just betting the farm on some story stock. So we divide it in top tier, mid tier, and of course we speculate because the market, one, demands it, and two, it's fun. But if you do it right, where you're not, going to be very upset if something goes wrong with one of these stories, and certainly I have seen them over the years from my early investing days, from my teenager to mid 20s, to from that point to now, where I learned the hard way that you really want to stick, big money in big companies. You don't want to bet a lot of money on these story stocks, but some are fun. But fun doesn't mean wealth. We want to build wealth and preserve wealth.
Well, David, you've hit the points that we really wanted to probe with you, and we will circle back further another time to talk more about the reality of that, the fiat debt trap that we're caught into and how people can work their way out of that. You've talked to us in the past about getting real and people knowing that they can, in fact, manage to carve out a portion of their portfolio to have precious metals as real money that can't be taken away from them in entirety as some of these other things like stocks can. Just grateful for your wisdom and continued being here in our corner on Reluctant Preppers. So thanks once again, David.
Well, my pleasure. Thank you.